Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. I'm, of course, Ray Russell here, anxious as always to head back. Another fun ride, another fun trip back in time. And last time out, we started talking about Bob's run in the Knoxville territory, which would come to be infamous over time. But things right now looking sunny and fun, having a great time in 1978. Bob Roop coming in as a babyface, as we discussed on the last episode. But it's not too long before Bob's true colors going to shine again, turning heel in the summer of 78. We'll talk about that and so much more. Bob's time as the booker there, and a lot of fun things tentatively on the docket this week. So in order to get to all of those and more, let's bring him back onto the show. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Roop.
Well, hey, Ray. It's good to talk to you again on the air. I don't know how we separate that, our private talk or official talk, where we're public here. I think some of the adjectives change when we're talking publicly, but we can't tell all the stories. The ones that are, somewhere in the range of decency, we can get those out. So anyway, it's good to be back.
Well, it's great to be back. It's good to talk to you, Bob. And at the very end of the day, all the stories you've told me off air, at least they're in somebody else's noggin. So
yeah.
If there ever comes a day, maybe we'll share those stories as well. I don't have them. I literally don't take notes on them, but I have them in the back of my head. So we'll probably dredge those up down the line maybe someday. But for now, we cover enough here on the show. And last week, everybody's been waiting. Everybody's been asking for about a year now. We've been on the air, and people have been waiting to get to the Knoxville territory. And I'm sure you know why. We won't go there right now. But it wasn't all gloom and doom. It was sunshines and rainbows when you got there. You had a good time. You enjoyed the territory. It was popping. Lots of great acquaintances, maybe a couple friends too. And it just sounded like a really great time. You know, what you were able to do in between the shows in the Knoxville territory, things to do. It wasn't quite San Francisco by things to do, but it sounded fun to me, hanging out on the boats, having a couple beers and just hanging out in between the matches and then doing what you got to do. And your woman drives up, and she is back with Bob Roop at this point in time. For those who missed the last episode, go back, check it out. We're just a few months into the Knoxville territory. We covered a lot of great names last time, Bob. Hickerson and Condrey, of course, Robert Fuller, Ricky Gibson, Lou Thez. You got to work Lou Thez. That's so damn cool to be able to say that. But it shows your age, too, at the same time.
Well, I'm not, you get to a certain stage or age where you don't mind, because you've lived a long time. It's almost like a bragging right now. Yeah, I'm 82. So what?
I made it here.
I'm still here, man. I'm not in a nursing home in a bed. I'm still getting up and out and about. I mean, I'm not moving as quick as I used to, but I'll still be able to move. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't mind being 82. It beats the alternative all I have.
It certainly does. Before we get going this week, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about Bob taking over the book here in Knoxville and just some of the other talent you're going to come across and some other things we talked about off air that we just kind of put this show together as far as what we're going to discuss this week. So very interesting. Going to be a fun time, I do believe it, as it always is. And in fact, I just found last week, Bob, an entire episode from this era. I believe the final week maybe of July of 1978 TV is on YouTube. And in pristine quality. I would almost call it HD type quality. I don't know who salvaged it, who saved it off of a reel, but it's out there right now on YouTube. It's July of 1978. Bob Roop and Jimmy Golden, a tag team at that point in time. It was really cool stuff to watch you guys out there doing an interview at the table.
Cool. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I'll send you the link.
Oh, yeah. Old good memories. I was thinking about it. I had a guy who had been my college coach. We're talking back in 1962. He had retired, and when I moved back up here, 25 years ago, he happened to be living he was retired by that time from coaching. He happened to be living about a block away, and he came over once or twice. And one day he came over, and he came in, and he was all excited, and he was probably my age now. He was like in his 80s then. To make a long story short, he acted like he was just seeing me for the first time, because what had happened was that he had gotten dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever, this was when it really wasn't that well known and diagnosed, but he basically lost his memory. So I remember telling him that what he ought to do is, and I told him what was happening to him, and he thought about it and he recognized it. I said, what you might want to do is take a tape recorder, and when you're lucid, when you're making sense to yourself or your wife or whoever, tell stories about yourself on tape, and then you can listen to them. Well, the only reason I'm telling that story is I don't know if you're aware of the fact that if I have that problem, at least as far as my wrestling career went, I've got a record here on all the shows that we've done about a great deal of my past that I can, even my memory is totally gone. These shows would all be like new stuff to me, but it's on record, and that's really nice to have. So I want to thank
it's great to have this record, and you're doing a lot of favors to a lot of the other guys too, who are no longer here to tell this, that were departed this earth before wrestling really, before it came out that wrestling was a work and guys were able to talk like they are now. You're able to tell stories of somebody going all the way back to the first episode, you breaking in some of the first talent that you came across, those guys. But yeah, just like Lou Thez no longer here. Not saying that Lou hasn't, he has a book out, so that's a little different, but just so many names that have passed away, that we cover here. It's a great time to hear stories about them that maybe nobody else even witnessed. The Ray Candy story, you talked about Ray and things like that. So right. You were the only other one in the room. So it's great to get all of these stories out there, and really it's there. It's out there forever now. So certainly credit to the wrestling community is the Wrestling Stoop, in my opinion, not just because I am a co-host, but because I'm just happy to have this out there.
Well, I agree. And, I have a mental image. One of the people we talked about in the past was Sputnik Monroe. And Sputnik had a very pivotal role in my development. He was my first trainer. Later on, one of the reunions, but it was before we could really talk openly with fans. We were still kayfabing. And I remember he had retired, and I remember he couldn't really talk about, all he could talk about was what was already seen, his public persona. He couldn't talk about the behind the scenes stuff like we can now. I remember seeing him, and I felt bad for him because he was kind of walking away because he didn't fit in. He couldn't really talk about how pivotal he had been. You remember we talked about his early involvement in race relations,
right,
and reaching out to black folks, and how ahead of his time he was there, what a good guy he was there, and to see him snaking off down the hall because he just kind of didn't fit in. He couldn't talk about what really happened on the really good stories like we're talking about now, and I'm so happy because I remember how depressed he looked. I'm so happy that being kind of at the same age now that he was then, that I is completely different. And I could talk about what really happened, not what came out on the TV, but what really happened. Yeah, that's really special. I'm glad we can do it.
Absolutely. I guess it's time to head back to Knoxville again at this point. We'll go back to 78 once again. Robert Fuller had the book here. Working underneath his brother Ron in the Knoxville territory. Ron, I believe, would have had to have been off this point in Alabama. So Robert up here, and he's not long for the territory of Knoxville. He's going to head back down to the Alabama side of things, the southern end of Southeastern. And at that point, you're going to replace Robert Fuller on the book. You're going to become booker here in the late summer, I believe, well, maybe the early fall, I should say. It's right around the end of September, I think Robert Fuller is going to leave. I don't remember. There may have been a story to that. I don't know if you know why Robert Fuller was replaced here, or if you even recall how you were the one chosen to take over. Was it your experience as booker? And what happened with Robert? It just seems odd, unless Ron really needed him in Alabama. Seems odd that his brother would get canned as booker.
Well, he wasn't canned. I think Robert probably had points in he had ownership in both promotions. I'm sure he had maybe 10% or maybe more. I don't know. It seemed like he would. No, it was all planned. If Robert wasn't down there, now at one time Louis Gillette was booking down there.
Okay.
But if Robert wasn't down there or some booker, then Ron Fuller had to be going back and forth, and it wasn't that far from Knoxville to were Mobile or wherever. But it was still, you had to go down there, be away from home. I think he had a girlfriend or a family or something in Knoxville. And I never saw anybody, but I think he must have had somebody. I mean, when I went to his apartment, there was never anybody else there. I was only over there about 3 times. But Robert, it was kind of a natural thing. It wasn't like, now Robert might have gotten to a point where he was having to repeat himself, say, for the 3rd or 4th time. I mean, you can do the same plot over and over again with different actors, but after a while, the fans start to see you do have basically the same fans, majority of them, and they begin to see what you're doing. And Robert might have wanted to leave because down there on the Gulf Coast, nicer, Pensacola and places like that, was much nicer. And Knoxville, don't get me wrong, Knoxville was nice, but it was in the middle of the mountains and completely different than. Nothing tropical about it, like Freeport. No, there was no, it wasn't like Robert was being fired or anything. I mean, he was part of the Fuller family, the Welch family, and they were all figured in. They were all connected. They were all guaranteed, no matter if every wrestler in the country went through there and got fired, they were still going to have their job. So I think Robert went down there so that Ron didn't have to go down, keep going back and forth. And I mean, maybe one reason that Robert might have wanted to go down there, change the scenery. He knew that a year or so or whatever, he could come back to Knoxville and just do his shtick all over again. But
that was what was nice if you were in good with the Fuller, the Welches, the Fields, the Goldens, whatever you want to call that big conglomerate family in the wrestling business. Was if you were in good with them, you had 2 territories essentially you could be working. Once you get stale or you start to go a little dry in one side of the territory, say Alabama, you could come up to Knoxville and do it all over again, or vice versa.
Right. Well, it was interesting. We talked in the past about when the Fullers came to Australia to take over. They bought a pig and a poke from Jim Barnett, and they came over there to run. And the talent they brought over there was representative of what they had in the Gulf Coast wrestling.
Don Carson, Dick Dunn, guys like that. Yeah.
And good hands. I mean, good guys. They were good hands. They were good in the ring, but they weren't Brute Bernard and Skull Murphy and some of the top talent, Lou Fez, some of the top talent in the world had been coming through from Barnett. And when those guys came over there, they just didn't measure up. I mean, to this day, Greg Peterson's about 5'4" or 5'5". I mean, he weighs about 170 pounds, and he's featured as a main event babyface. He had a good career, nothing to, not a knock, but it's just, it is show business.
Right, and he's not Spiros Arion.
No, he's not. And what? Imagine if he gets in a tag match with Spiros. He comes up to about Spiros' shoulder.
Yeah.
So, and again, the talent was fine, but I mean, that wasn't the important part because Laurence Olivier is going to draw a lot more money back in his heyday. He's going to draw a lot more money on a Broadway stage than would say Howdy Doody or any lesser actor, because he was known worldwide as a tremendous dramatic actor. So it's the same thing in Australia. They had the biggest names, and the way that those names would resonate with Australian fans was that the wrestling magazines that were published in the United States also came to Australia. So they got to see Dick the Bruiser, Skull Murphy, and Brute Bernard. They got to see them on magazine covers. So when they showed up over there to wrestle, in the fans' minds, they were big stars because they were on magazine covers and things. We've got 4 or 5 magazines in this country that's all made up of people that, by actually being in the magazine, that's what makes them famous. What they're doing in their active life sometimes isn't anywhere near as meaningful as just the fact that they're famous. And there's been many people who their shtick was simply to be seen at the right places where the paparazzi and the photographers were, right. and what they did to be famous wasn't they did. That's what they were famous for.
They're famous for being famous.
Yeah, famous for being famous with no basis of any kind of skill of any kind. Yeah, that was, and that's kind of where wrestlers were too. So what you look like made a difference, and the way you could, your ability to talk your ability to interview.
Right.
I mean, you got Roddy Piper. You go from him to Silento Rodriguez, who's mute.
Well, that's
major difference.
it's quite a jump, yeah.
well, actually, Roddy Piper at his prime, there was nobody better.
Couldn't touch him.
As a heel, couldn't touch him. Oh, but yeah, again, we're talking about talent. Well, up in Knoxville, let's go back to Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
You had Robert and Ron Fuller, and both big guys. You know, Ron was a 6'9" or whatever. Robert was, I don't know, 6'3". Both of them athletic looking, tall, nice looking guys. And you had Ronnie Garvin. You had Malenko. Now, Malenko at that time was kind of in the twilight of his career. Now, you had Stomper. Now, Stomper was a major league heel at that time. He
had the look. He had the look, the size. Yeah. He was believable in that Stomper role, for sure.
Right. But they didn't have a whole card up and down on both sides of guys that were magazine cover type guys.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I don't want to say a minor league, but if it was a major leagues, it would be like a kind of a new team or a lesser team. One that hasn't really, it's not like the New York Yankees. You know, it's like the Tampa Bay, whatever the baseball team is down there that came up, you know, much later when they expanded. So the talent wasn't the same. Now, as far as Robert Fuller, I knew Ron Fuller, had known him for a while because I helped break him in. Had seen him over in Australia when he was there, when they tried to take over Barnett's deal. And so I knew him, and, you know, we had a congenial relationship of no bad blood between us that I knew of, but I didn't know Robert. And when I got there, I found out that for some reason Robert didn't like me. I don't know why, but I could just feel it. They had a couple things come up that proved it. And part of it might have been because I wasn't real thrilled with him either. It's my fault. By my value systems, there were things about him that bothered me. Now, again, that's my problem, not his. But anyway, I'll give you one example. Now, I'm not accusing Robert of doing anything, but we were up on the lake on our boat. He was on his boat with somebody. I was up there with, I don't remember who, but it doesn't matter. And he told me, I don't remember what we were looking for, but maybe some place to dive off, like a higher level to be able to dive into the lake and not have to worry about hitting the bottom, you know, where it'd be deep enough you could dive. I like to dive. And so anyway, he told me about this place. So I he actually showed me where this place where you could do that. And he motored over there. He stayed and he was watching me. He was watching with interest. What it was this, it was like a rocky, came right out of the water. There was this like rocky hill that was slightly away from me, so you could climb up it. It had open areas like ledges where you could, and holes in it where you could step and reach up and grab and pull yourself up and climb up it, maybe 20 feet high. Well, I pulled my boat up to it. Somehow I got whoever was with me was more in the boat. I stepped into one of the little ledges, and I reached up and I pulled myself up and took another step. And just for some reason, I just had this feeling. And before I reached up to the place above me, I looked around, and because there were all these little holes, like I say, these little places that the rock had cracked, and there was a place back in there, like maybe 6 inches deep or so, where there was like a little ledge there. Well, I looked, and I could see about maybe 6 holes from where the first step I'd taken up. I could see maybe 6 holes. 4 of them had copperhead moccasins in them, laying in the hole. So if I'd have stepped in the hole, I would have stepped on a copperhead and I would have got bitten. So I immediately backed off completely. I jumped back on the boat, and Robert kind of laughed and he just took off. And I was thinking, you know, did he put me on there on purpose? Now, I'm not saying he did, but here's what happened later. He was getting ready to go to Mobile. He was leaving. He had a week to go. He called me over. He asked me to come over to his place. He said, "What are you planning on booking your first week?" Which would be like 2 weeks from then, because he said, I'll tailor my bookings my last week here, I'll tailor my bookings to what you're going to do the week after I leave. So I told him, and one of them was I was going to have a Malenko and Garvin had gotten to a stage where their fight was their angle was hot enough to you could do a chain match. So I told Fuller that chain match between Garvin and Malenko, and two or three other my main angles. And so he said, okay, I'll tailor my bookings to that. But what he did was that when the bookings came out, he booked a chain match between Malenko and Garvin, and those other two matches I told him about, he booked those matches too.
Wow. So he booked your ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what am I going to do? Act the crap out of it or what? You know, I mean, he's my boss's brother. I mean, he's not my boss, but, well, when he was booker, he could tell me what to do in the ring. But he was leaving. I hadn't become the booker yet, but I was only officially. But, I mean, I was the booker in waiting. Let's be kind of like the president, you know, been voted in. They just hadn't taken off.
So it wasn't a Shire deal where you were just kind of walking down the hall and just happened to be there. Hey, here you go. You think you're a booker here. So this is well thought out. It was planned. Ron Fuller obviously had to have the say in regards to who was going to replace his brother Robert as booker here in Knoxville. How quick did that come about? Obviously, I'm not trying to pinpoint an exact date, but would you say it was like 2 weeks before, a month before? Like in your mind, like how long ago would you say this was put into place before Robert left the territory?
Oh, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And it was real. I mean, it wasn't a momentous thing. It wasn't a big deal.
Right.
I'd been a booker, and I knew how to do it. I had a bunch of guys. I'd been there working for a while, which is good because I knew everybody. It's helpful when you know what the talent can do. No, it wasn't a big deal. And Ron Fuller came to me. He knew I didn't apply for the job. I actually enjoyed working just as one of the boys as opposed to booking, because when you're booking, you become management. You're not talent. You're not labor anymore. You have to distance yourself from labor, which is the boys. You can't. In fact, I had been rooming. I'd been sharing an apartment with Jimmy Golden when I got the book, and I had to move out. I went ahead and got my own apartment. Once Robert was gone, although now he was gone, I didn't hear from him again. He didn't come back. I certainly didn't book him back. Now, if Ron had asked me to, I would have. And I didn't hold any grudges or anything. I don't know. Maybe he had a mental lapse. Maybe he wasn't being treacherous. But, the Copperhead thing was fairly serious. Now, at this point in time, his brother Ron is still knocking me to this day. And Robert has tried to kind of make peace. And I've seen him. I've seen him myself. I saw him in Tampa, I don't know.
Okay.
And he was friendly and congenial and all that. I don't hold grudges. Like I say, he was friendly. One of the boys, I didn't know him that well personally. He had a good career and very helpful, of course, when you're born into wrestling. You don't really have to work real hard to get into the business. You're sort of groomed into it. But he did real well with it, and so did Ron. Yeah, so Robert and I had kind of a rocky get-together when it first started. But right. I didn't see him after that. Once he was gone, he was gone. Ron never asked me, hey, why don't you book Robert back up here for a match or two, which just wouldn't be unusual. Once he'd been gone for a month or two, you could book a guy back. And don't get me wrong, I didn't hold any hard feelings. If Ron had asked me to book his brother, Ron Fuller,
sure,
I would have done. Why not?
Oh, yeah,
I mean, why can I tell him no? If it's one thing, it'd be easy to book him, say, in Knoxville, because Knoxville was a big show, because you had the big building. You could have 8 matches there instead of like in a smaller town, weekend town of like the biggest house you might get there is $3 or $4 grand. You'd probably have only maybe 4 matches, maybe 5 at the most. But in Knoxville, because you did draw a lot of money there, or you could have 8 matches. You could have the girls. You could have Andre. You could have the little people on the card, or the big guys like Haystacks. And you could use the gimmick matches. You could add that to the card to give it to have something different, and give it kind of a different look. So if he'd asked me to book Robert, I would have had no problem. I just would have brought him up, put him in a match that didn't mean a whole lot. I wouldn't have had him come up and beat one of my main heels. I probably brought somebody from who might met something from outside, maybe from over in Memphis or someplace, but or maybe someone Robert had a feud with that might still be there. I wasn't going to detract from the Knoxville territory. It's show business. You can always be the guy to death in the arenas, and you can remake him on TV. The very next week, you can have him. People forget all about him getting slaughtered in the arena. But yeah, I got off to a really shaky start with Robert, but again, he was gone. So then I was dealing with Ron, and I didn't have any problems with him. In fact, I didn't see him. The only time I saw him was in Knoxville. So yeah, I did see him. But I mean, it wasn't like he was at the show in California. Shire was at 3 or 4 shows a week, getting the box office and mess with that money. Ron Fuller, he came to Knoxville. I wasn't booking him much, I don't think. I don't remember.
I think Ron would just come in for the big paydays, the Harley race type matches and things like that. You talked about maybe the entire roster wasn't stacked on the underneath, but at the top, you guys, you had some really great talent. Early on, when you were a babyface, you were aligned with Jimmy Golden. You won the Southeastern tag team titles from Hickerson and Condrey in July. You drop them back about a month later, and this is when it gets interesting for you because, like pretty much any territory you've ever been in, eventually you're going to turn heel. And I'm going through the TV results from August here, Bob. And on the 19th, in the TV studio, Bob Roop defeats Gorgeous George Jr. And right. So we all know Gorgeous George. That's a heel character. So you're still a babyface here in the middle of August. Fast forward 1 week later on TV, and you're wrestling babyface Ron Slinker. You go over on Ron Slinker the following week. So in between, I was doing some digging, and you wrestle your former partner, Jimmy Golden, on that week's Knoxville card on the Friday night card, August 25th. So the heel turn you made, by my estimation, would have had to have taken place on that August 19th TV episode, but obviously after your match with Gorgeous George. So what I'm doing right now is I've sent out some feelers because I was not alive, nor was I living in Knoxville back in 1978. So I've sent out some feelers, and I'm trying to get some deeper details into your heel turn. So we're going to save that for the next episode, unless you remember it off the top of your head. But you've turned heel so many times, I don't know if you remember that one.
Yeah, not just in my business life, but my personal life too, I guess. Yeah, I don't recall exactly what we did. So if you could, I'll think on it, and I'll see if I can bring up that memory. Sometimes it takes a while sometimes, but I start thinking about it, and then I forget it, and then all of a sudden, 4 or 5 days later, this image just pops in my head of what I was thinking 4 days earlier. So I'll do that, and we'll see. We'll see what I can come up with. But please keep doing your research.
Oh, absolutely.
You might have a better chance with it than I do. Yeah, and it's interesting because we talked about Jimmy Golden on a past episode, and one of the really, really sweethearts of a guy. He was just a really, really nice person. And I roomed with him for, I don't know how long, but months, for a long time. And, it was, of course, I was a babyface. As soon as I turned heel, of course, I had to leave. But as soon as I knew I was going to, I went got my own place. But, yeah, he was a good guy and good worker.
Hey everybody, Gene Jackson here, inviting you to check out the Retro Wrestling Review, where each week I'm joined by some great co-hosts who help me review classic episodes of USWA Championship Wrestling, and right now we are doing week-by-week reviews of 1993. But we don't just do reviews, sometimes we get a chance to interview some of the people who were there and lived it, plus do watch-alongs. It's a lot of fun, so check out new episodes that drop every Wednesday at WrestleCopia.com, and to find links to everything associated to the podcast, you can go to USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories Whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85, 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Pro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Pro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. And of course, now would be a fantastic time to become a WrestleCopia patron. I'm talking about that $5 all access tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, where you get so many gifts for just $5, including all of my insanely detailed show notes for every episode of The Grenade Show, Regional Wrestling, and the Monday Warfare podcast. You'll also get early access to a lot of the podcasts here on the WrestleCopia brand, where you can listen days and sometimes as much as a week earlier than the rest of the listeners. We also offer remastered versions of the earliest episodes of The Grenade Show, covering the 1989 NWA project. Includes enhanced sound quality, plus new content and conversation never heard before. But that's still not all, guys. You also get at least a dozen digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure each and every month, plus random bonus video drops, and of course, the Patreon exclusive Watch Along series, covering mini past WWF and WCW events. And if that's not all, videocasts, also now a part of Patreon. And for those who like all of their podcasts in one nice, neat little pile, the WrestleCopia Patreon also offers a Patreon exclusive Spotify account. You can actually go over to your Spotify with your WrestleCopia Patreon credentials. Instead of listening or downloading directly from Patreon, you can go over to Spotify, listen to all the latest shows, including all of the early releases. And you get all of that and so much more for just $5. No subscription, cancel anytime. Give it a try for a month, guys. I think you'll like the content that I offer, and every penny of it goes right back here into paying the bills. So if you're looking to support that next up-and-coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia. Help me pay some of the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and all of the great shows here up and running for the months and the years to come.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
So, I have a few names. We ran down some names last week. I thought it would be fun to touch on maybe a few more this week and see if you have any memories of these guys working the territory when you were there.
Okay.
Well, right out of the gate, I know you remember these two. We've talked about them in the past. You told a story prior in regards to how they would have to handle the fans here in the Kentucky, Tennessee area. I'm talking about the legendary team of Ron and Don Wright, not just as a tag team, but also as singles wrestlers as well. They pretty much done it all there in that Eastern Tennessee area, Eastern Kentucky. And yeah, man, Ron Wright was quite the legend. He would go on to work all the way to the 90s as a manager for Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. So even I, as a kid, a teenager, I got to witness a little Ron Wright in my life. Maybe not in the ring, but at least on the microphone, which was equally as fun. So I wanted to see if you had anything else you wanted to add for either Ron or Don Wright.
Well, I told a story about in the arena in Johnson City where a fan or someone they knew we were having personal difficulties with. This guy had threatened to come to the matches and do something. I don't know if he was going to try to expose Ron and Don or whatever, but there was a match going on, and his brother Don had come in and said something to Ron about something that was going on down at ringside. It was a person that Ron was having problems with. So Ron says, I'm going to go get that SOB. And I said, what? Because there was a match going on. I followed him out of the dressing room, and he wasn't dressed out. He still had on his street clothes. And he went down the aisle. He grabbed this guy, and he dragged him. He dragged him all the way back. He smacked him a couple of times and dragged him all the way back to the back. And now Ron's a heel, and this is his hometown, and he's got a lot of heat with these people for years. I mean, like 20, 30 years. They've been hating him as a heel. And I don't know, maybe he switched babyface after a while, just from being a local. But basically, let's put it this way, he had a lot of heat in the arena. So he drags this guy back. He puts the boots to him, and he's got him down. And I'm going, hey, I'm visualizing lawsuits and all these kind of things. And the guy goes to reach down in his pocket, and Ron rears up and lifts his right leg about knee high, his foot, and stomped the guy right in the face.
Oh.
And I went, first of all, we're outside the dressing room. We could just about everybody in the building could see us. So I'm going, oh my God, you got 6,000 witnesses here, what's going on? And he said, well, don't worry about it, Bob. I'll take care of it. And I said, Ron, what are you doing stomping us? He said, well, he was going for a gun. And I said, really? The guy was holding his face. Ron just went down, reached in his pocket, and he did. He pulled out a little pistol that the guy was going after.
Wow.
So about that time, this guy up in the bleachers that was right next to us, this guy was about 5 feet away. He was up like on the third row of the bleachers. So he's about, say 4 feet off the ground. Don Wright was out there too. Don and Ron, myself, this casualty, the guy that stompee. So, well, with Stomper on the card, maybe we'll see the guy who got his face stomped in.
There you go.
But a big guy too, he's about my size, comes over and he says, why don't you try that with me? And he had a knife in his hand. Well, Don Wright doesn't go like down to the bottom of the bleachers and walk up the bleachers.
Right.
Up like step by step. He started climbing. In order to climb up to the level that he was at, he had to have both hands holding onto the bleachers on one hand on each side to pull himself up. And this guy with a knife is about 18 inches away. The knife is about 8 inches away from his face. And he's looking at the guy, just looking him dead in the eye, not saying a word, and climbing up in the bleachers. And he climbed up. And as he did, this guy kept backing up. By the time Don stood up and moved towards him, this guy was bigger than Don, and he had a knife in his hand. The guy turned and took off. I was looking at that. I was going, oh my God. When one guy gets stomped on the floor, this other guy, Ron, facing down this other guy with a knife in his hand, I'm thinking, we're in show business, All the violence we do is simulated. What I'm seeing here, this is about as real as it gets.
Let's be honest too. Ron and Don were no longer in their peak prime years as young, handsome well, I don't know if they were handsome, but scrapping young men. These guys are, they're grizzled vets by this point. They're not screwing around.
Well, they were definitely good old boys. They were country folk, and they proud of it. And don't get me wrong, they were both intelligent guys. Street smart as they could be.
Yeah.
Because they had done things. They were from a generation where they had been around Knoxville long enough back when the first early TV that they were on, the first early wrestling shows on TV were live. So they would work on the TV live, and they made a mistake. One of the hot angles they just did the angle, and they just hung around and went and took a shower. Well, it went out live, and by the time they got dressed and were ready to leave, there were 500 people down around the television studio waiting for them to come out. They were out there with guns and knives and ready to kill those guys. So they had to wait a couple hours and finally get the police in there, those guys to even get out of there. So what they've developed a system that once they dressed out and got ready to put on their wrestling gear, they packed all their clothes into their wrestling bags, shoes and clothes and everything, all their civilian stuff. And as soon as they finished their match, where they always did something really, really horrible, to somebody, blood and guts and everything else, they would run, grab their bag. It'd be moving on the double, too, because they knew people were on their way. And they would run out to their car and take off and get out of there before the fans could get down there. Well, now, you're talking about guys who have been ready, willing, and able to get some serious heat. There's a lot of heels that I knew during my whole entire career that never wanted that level of heat. They didn't want to have to worry about people trying to find them in public, because in public you have police, for example, who arrest you for trying to kill people, like wrestlers. The fact that these guys are willing to get such deep heat, but I had a lot of respect for them. Now, I never had angles up there that were that hot because you didn't need to. We did great business just with regular. I didn't have to insult anybody's father being a coward or anything. We didn't have to do that kind of extreme angle. And by the time I'd gotten a lot wiser from earlier stuff in Florida, we weren't going to do that kind of, because there was no sense. That deal that wrestlers have about, every match I had was a riot. I said, well, if you've been working for me, you would have had more than 2 matches, because riots are the worst things in the world. A lot of wrestlers think it's a badge of honor. Oh, yeah, we got them so mad we had a riot. Well, riot's the worst thing you could possibly do for any sporting event, because people get hurt. And, usually older folks like me, I would hate to be in some kind of a riot in a studio or stadium or a football arena or anyplace else, because it's risky business. So what happens is you lose your older folks as customers. People won't bring their children anymore because it's not safe for them either when there's riots going on, chairs flying and all that, and you got your kids there. So it's really terrible for business. I was worried that night. I told Ron, in fact, I helped do it. We dragged that guy in the dressing room. And we got a cop out there, too. We got a cop to come and stand at the door, so people didn't come in there and try to rescue the guy. I wanted to get him out of sight, because the idea of Ron sitting there stomping the guy in the head, this guy was from the audience. So he was like one of them. And they, once in a while, they'll come, like the guy with the knife, they'll come and try to make a rescue of one of their own. But we never went to that level. We talked last time about the Kentucky towns, Hazard and Harlan, Kentucky. They were Saturday night towns.
Saturday night in a mountain town in Kentucky sounds like a hell of a fun time.
Well, they were good. They were good towns. It was a longer drive than there were some Saturday night towns that were, 25, 30 miles from Knoxville. But it was a pretty good drive. But it was also a pretty good payoff too, because they were bigger buildings. They seat maybe you could draw maybe 8, 9, 10 grand in those places, which was a good payoff for everybody. As opposed to a smaller club where maximum it might be 2 or 3 grand.
You just said something that really piqued my interest here. I believe Friday night was the big show in Knoxville every week, correct?
Right.
Okay, you said Saturday night towns. Some were 30 minutes away from Knoxville. So if I went to the show on Friday night and got to watch the big show, and then Friday or Saturday was TV also, if I remember correctly.
Right. Okay.
And then sometimes they would go out and do Harlan or Hazard, things like that, but sometimes they would do it closer to home. I'm assuming, pardon my ignorance here, because I just don't know a whole lot about the smaller town system in the Knoxville territory. But I would imagine the matches would have to be changed up, so the people that attended maybe the show in Knoxville aren't seeing the same thing the next night, just 30 minutes down the road.
We'd do something different. We had to be more circumspect in what we did. If you have blow-offs where you blow off everything at the same time, what are you going to follow yourself with the next week?
Right.
So we always had something. We had a cage match. We had something that was getting hot, that we would get, we would get hotter that night before or after the cage match, probably before. And then we would enhance it on TV and bring it back the next week or a week after as a main event. It was fairly simple way to do it. I didn't need to have Ronnie Garvin and Malenko. I could have done it by myself, but I would have done a poor job of it because having guys with 60 years of experience between them or 50. Ronnie had about 20. Malenko had probably 25 or 30. You have those kind of guys that, and most of that time, or at least a good portion of that time, is main eventers, not just being in a business, but guys that were figured in, that were main event guys. And they had access to all these angles. And I found out years later, when I was going to see Ronnie after we were both retired, he told me that when he had worked up for the Rougeaus, he had been the booker up there for a couple summers. So, he had all these ideas and things. And Malenko, we all lived in an apartment complex where we could get together without exposing the business and talk it over. And so what we did, you want to talk about how we make things look different?
Sure, we can go into that. Okay.
Well, we look for a way to dress up the matches, just something different, and TV. And one of the things they came up with all these kind of showbiz type gimmicks. And one of the things we came up with was it was a box, it was a crate. We didn't do it every match, but when we had the blow off, we had the crate on TV, and we did all kinds of things in the crate. One time we had a baby face in the crate. One time it was me in the crate, tied up, tarred and feathered. And so when we brought the crate to the arena in Knoxville, he always said, "Oh yeah, every show I ever did was a sellout." Well, it was a sellout that night because we had promised on TV that there was going to be something in the box that weighed close to 500 pounds.
Yeah.
And everybody assumed it was Andre the Giant. So whatever it was going to be, they wanted to see it. Now, if we had taken the crate down there and Darling Dagmar jumped out, that would have, probably would have killed the town. But we had 4 female wrestlers who dressed up to look like they look like ring girls, like in Japan and some places in this country. Once in a while, they'll have ring girls that have bouquets of flowers, and when the wrestlers come to the ring, they're usually in the ring. The girls are already in the ring waiting, and it's a big deal in Japan. Just about every match they do it, and so you get in the ring, and the ring girls will come up, and they're dressed very nicely, made up, hair is nice, very nice clothes, looking really. Usually, they're beautiful women, and they would present you with flowers. Well, Malenko was in the ring waiting the night we brought the box down. He was going to have a match with Ronnie Garvin after he was going to take on what was in the box first. They had done a deal. We'd done a deal through signing contracts and all that where Malenko had shipped himself. He screwed up and somehow got himself where he had to take on whatever was in the box.
Mm-hmm.
So he's down there. He's got a chain around his neck, looped a couple times, draped around his neck. He's got a club in his hand. He's got brass knucks on. He's expecting, and like everybody else, he's supposedly expecting Andre the Giant to get out of the box.
Right.
Well, when they opened the box, instead of Andre the Giant, these 4 women come out of the box, and they open it in a way that they can step right up on the apron and get in the ring. And all of them have flowers, and they're all dressed up. We sent all of them down to the beauty shop to get their hair done and
sure.
Makeup and all that. So they look great. And Joyce Grable was one of them, a lady wrestler. There another lady wrestler, and I think 2 of the girls might not have been in the business, but they were associated somehow, and they were smart. So you didn't have to worry about it. they weren't figured in on what the main, taking the bumps, to put it this way. So Malenko's waiting. He's got the chain, the brass knucks, and he's just, whatever's going to be in the box, he looks like he's expecting a grizzly bear to get out of the box. He's so keyed up and everything. Well, they open it up, and these beautiful, four nice-looking women get out, and very elegantly get in the ring. They hold the ropes for each other, and they get in the ring. They got high heels on, believe it or not. So he's like puzzled, like they've got flowers, and they're all smiling at him and waving at him and, flirting with him and all that. So they come up and they all present him with flowers. They hold him out to him, and he's looking at him suspiciously, but all of a sudden he sees, well, how could he possibly going to be hurting me? So they took the flowers and they asked to get a picture taken with it. And so one of the girls had the camera. They went to take the picture, and as soon as the flash went off, like that supposedly blinded him, the girls attacked him. They pulled off their shoes and started beating him for their shoes. Well, he took a bump. He went down. They're kicking him, and the fans went crazy. Well, Malenko, he took it as far as he could. He jumped up, and when he did, to give him credibility, when he got, he jumped up, he's mad. They didn't kill him, of course, but they certainly embarrassed him. Getting beat on with shoes probably didn't feel good. But the first three girls, other than Joyce Grable, all took off and easily got out of the ring. Joyce brought up the rear, and she was the last one to get out. And Malenko, by that time, got up, and he caught her as she was getting ready to step through the ropes out onto the apron. And he grabbed her by the hair, and he had those brass knucks on his right hand still. And he hit her with a punch, and she took a hell of a bump. It looked like it killed her. And the other girls, the three girls, carried her out of there. Well, Malenko had all his heat back, But you talk about a pop. Oh, when those girls attacked him, the fans didn't know what was going on. That was a good thing about it. They didn't know what we were going to do. They weren't going, oh, wait, they're going to beat the crap out of him. They didn't suspect it because they're not big, great big 200-pound women. They're all 110, 115 pounds. And, they're dressed in nice dresses and stockings and heels and made up and, looking like holding flowers. And so if Malenko could be fooled by it, we figured the fans could be too. And they were, because when that girls attacked him, they obviously were surprised because the roar that went up, nobody was suspecting that. They didn't know what was going on. It was quiet. Believe it or not, it was quiet as a mouse in that place until they attacked him. And then, oh, my God.
I'm sure there was confusion as to the whole situation until the payoff begins anyway.
Now, one of the, I'll digress just a little. It's the same thing, but there were people in the promotion that didn't like that kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm aware.
They thought, oh, that's just too far. That's too much. I want to say, look, this is show business.
That was the exact term I was thinking as I was letting you talk. I didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to go. It was show business. I was thinking of it in Vince McMahon's voice though. Show business, pal. But at the end of the day, that's basically what it is. And it's kind of funny though, your background being an Olympian and coming into wrestling, but by this point, about 10 years into the business, and you kind of see it for what it is, or at least what it's transformed. And wrestling was always that way. I have clippings from the 1920s and 30s of guys in wrestling gimmicks, even back, over 100 years ago. So I'm not saying that, there wasn't a spot for the traditionalist stuff. Obviously there was. I love a Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk Jr. match, but you need a little bit of everything. And this is a little bit of everything. And, this is the entertainment value. It's not just, well, we see these blood and guts matches, but what else you got? Yeah. And this is the way to kind of keep it changed up so that maybe you'll still get that blood and guts match every week because that's just the kind of town this is. Certain cities were just that way, or certain territories were just that way. But some territories, they had to always have that, classic wrestling match. Some territories had it. Right. Again, we'll go back to the show business part to the Knoxville territory. And, you're not far away from Memphis, right? It's the same state.
Right.
And so we know Jerry Jarrett is very famous, and even Jerry Lawler, when he was booking, very famous for show business type stuff. Jerry Lawler, he loved horror films. So when he had the book, he would book himself against like Frankenstein's monster and things like that. So And you do it here, the tar and feather and stuff like that, but we would see things like that in Memphis as well. And so I don't think you're that far away. I don't think Knoxville's that different from the Memphis fans. I know everything's different. Every territory is treated differently, and the fans, come to expect certain things, but I don't see the harm in that. It's not like you're doing it every week.
Let me add the thing that proves, or that makes what you say completely credible and valid. The people that didn't like that kind of thing is, that exposed the business. No, what it did was it set up the match between Garvin and Malenko, and they went because they had a match after the stuff with the girls. Malenko, after he hit Joyce Grable, he had a ton of his heat back. They'd forgotten about it. They got their pop. Everybody was thrilled, but he had his heat back, and Garvin, of course, caught Joyce Grable and had her to the girls. He got in the ring like, hey, how about you try hitting me, you coward? What they did is they had a great 45-minute match. And I mean great. I'm talking about Ric Flair and Sting match, but different, not the same kind.
Right.
Not Flair style, but the same quality. They didn't do a lot of high spots. They didn't do a lot of Ronnie hitting the ring and coming off and giving Malenko a tackle. They wrestled 45 minutes. They had the fans with them every step of the way. Well, the indicator or proof, if what you're doing is working, is how was the next show? Well, the next show was either sold out or right next to it also. We were doing great business everywhere. With matches like that, what you did was, by using the box and things like that, you're advertising in a way. You're advertising Andre the Giant or a bear on your show, but you don't actually say it. But people think, well, maybe it's going to be. And whatever it is, you get them to come to the arena. Once you get them in the arena, then you give them a show with the pop, that little pop they got when the girls attacked Malenko, and then 45 minutes of a great match where they got every kind of emotion, excitement and eagerness and anger and relief and all those things, all the bathos and pathos that go with pro wrestling matches. With Ronnie and Malenko, matches were just great. I mean, they were on a 100 scale, they were like 102. And people believed every second of it because, it was just, next week, we were doing great business with that kind of stuff. And I don't want to be Mr. Sour Grapes here, but I kept having to struggle sometimes to get it done. Well, I had one. I'll bitch about it again just to prove I'm an old man who's a grouchy old complainer. I'll leave it to you out there listening to this. Imagine yourself in my spot. I'm sitting in a box, and I've just got on my under tights, which is like a Speedo type bathing suit, but maybe not quite that tight, but it's under tights. And that's all. No shoes, nothing else. I'm tied up. I'm gagged. My hands and my feet are tied. My hands are tied behind me, and my feet are tied. And I've got a gag on, and I'm covered with tar and feathers. It's actually not tar, it's honey. But it's dark, it's molasses, it's dark, like dark molasses, and feathers. So I'm sitting in the box. Now, if you're going to show, now imagine this, I'm the booker. Now, Ronnie and Malenko and I came up with this, about me being in the box. We'd done a series of stuff I wasn't the first thing in the box, but I would say that number 4 on TV. Well, imagine that, going to that effort, and then right when you go to pull the box open, you pull the box door open, and you see what's in there, and all of a sudden, imagine if you're in a movie theater, and all of a sudden the film broke, or the machine broke, and the picture just disappears from the screen. You go, oh my God, you lose your, vicariously, you're with the program, all of a sudden you're brought back to reality, and the whole effect of the thing is lost. Well, when I was in the box, our Malenko and Bobby Orton, were coming to get what was in the box, and they were thinking it was going to be Crusher Blackwell as the Bumblebee. So Malenko had a bat. They had to, they were ready to fight. They were going, whatever was in the box, if they needed to fight it, they were going to. And it was me. They go and pull me out. Well, I didn't want the camera to stay on me for more than like 30 seconds, but definitely get me out of the box, stand me up, and get a top to bottom shot, be talking about why I look this way. But as soon as they opened the box, and you could just barely see me, the guy that was doing the commentating and the announcer told the guy running the cameras to come back to the desk. So you didn't really see me even come out of the box. Oh man, I was so pissed off. I was so hot. Here do I mind having molasses and feathers in my hair and in my tights and everything? I have to go shower and all that. No, I don't. But it'd be like if there's 10 steps to this process, and you stop at 3. It just made no sense. And I was fighting that kind of mentality the whole time I was there. And that became part of why when it became time to think about doing opposition. And see, a lot of folks out there think that opposition is like you're being a traitor. No. In this country, a democratic country, where you have freedom, there's hostile takeovers all the time. Some of the people who do the hostile takeovers are even family members.
Bob, and we have so much to get into when we get into all of that. And I mean, it's going to be, people are going to, come out of that with whatever they thought probably going in. We might sway a few people to see it a little differently, but in general, I'm sure people have made up their mind. These wrestling fans that have just glommed on to, the stories that have been out there or the way things went down and whatever, they're going to believe whatever they're going to believe. When we get there, we're going to break it down as best we can with as much facts and information as we can. And we have quite a bit, to be honest with you, that's never really been presented, at least not all in one lump sum, like we're going to be doing when we get to that point. But I see, frustration in the booking part of things in regards to, I'm the booker, and I'm not digging into this today. So I'm just going to say my piece and one little part here, and we'll go back to just kind of just talking about the good stuff anyway. But
I was teasing a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't that was a problem, and it was admitted, over there on the Ron Fuller, the podcast that he does in the past. He's talked about how, Les Thatcher, who was the announcer, former wrestler, great trainer. He trained a lot of talent over the last, several decades and things. He did some commentary for Jim Cornette and Smoky Mountain as well. So I have nothing but respect for Les and everything he's brought to the wrestling business. But according to Ron, Les was his go-to guy in regards to, he was calling and reporting everything back to Ron. So this is what Bob's doing this week. This is what Bob's doing here. This is what, I can't believe this. And, you go back to traditionalists and the way people thought things should be ran. And it sounds to me based on, and you guys can go listen to yourself. I guess we're giving a plug to Ron Fuller's podcast here, but you guys can go back and listen to those. And Ron basically spells it out that, Les didn't agree with the booking. He didn't like this over the top stuff. And so he would report it back to Ron. And at least the way Ron sells it now is he didn't care for it. So he kind of gave Les the Iggy to do certain things that would, prevent certain things. Now, I don't know. I do know that in that instance, I think Ron even said on his podcast, that was Les's call to, block that from being viewed, which Les Thatcher was not the producer and he was not the booker. So I think that was, a little above, his decision making. And I wasn't there. I don't know what was going on, but it does suck when you book a gimmick like that and you do it to yourself or anybody for that matter, but you're covered in honey and feathers for this big visual on TV, to make everybody pop at home, and you get some comeuppance and things like that. But because it's kind of hokey in some people's eyes, they have power to do things that they don't necessarily have the right to do. And in this instance, it felt like that's what happened with that whole situation. And I can see that being extremely frustrating. I get it. I just, I don't understand that logic because, when you were in Florida, whatever you were booking is what you were booking. When you were in San Francisco, whatever you were booking is what was out there. Even if Roy Shire was, whatever, until the end there, when Shire changed the finish on your cage match with Kevin Sullivan, that's when Sullivan said, screw this. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. And Kevin quit not too long after that. A lot of people think Kevin got fired when you left, and that's not what happened. Kevin had said that Roy Shire comes in, me and Bob had put together this masterpiece storyline, and it ends, I think, it was supposed to be Kevin going over, but Roy Shire comes and goes, nah, we're not going to do that though. And so Kevin got frustrated and he up and quit. So here we are in Knoxville now, and you've been booking for quite a while at this point when the angle you're talking about comes up on TV, and then you come to find out, well, the camera didn't shoot it. Well, somebody made that call, and it was somebody that may not have had the right to make that call, but they knew the right people and they got it done. And that's kind of shitty situation. And again, I'm not knocking Les Thatcher in this. I'm trying not to. I've probably upset some Thatcher fans by saying this, but I don't approve of people going above other people's heads when they don't even have the right to do so. And I could see how that would be frustrating as a booker.
Yeah, well, I respect Les Thatcher too. I like him. He was inducted into the Fez Hall of Fame a couple of years ago. I've seen him down there. He was here this past summer too, and I always say hi to him and all that. He's done real well, and he, like you say, he's been a great trainer and all that. I suspected he was acting for Fuller. I didn't know. I didn't have access. I don't watch Fuller's podcast. So the fact that you just informed me is news to me. See, you never stop learning. Stay alive and keep your brain open. But I didn't realize that I figured he was working with Ron, but I didn't think that he was directly reporting back to him, because the bottom line is, how is business? And business is great. Hey, Ron, you're selling out everywhere. We're selling out. You're not doing it. We are. I mean, you can say, well, it's my promotion. I'm the one doing it. Well, no, you're not, because you're not making the TVs. You're not coming up with it. We had to we couldn't do the same thing Robert Fuller did. We had to do different stuff. And I had Ronnie there who'd been there the whole time, and Malenko who'd been there part of the time. They knew what had been done before. So that was, which I didn't. I didn't know what they had done a year before, say. I had only been there a few months, but we were doing different stuff. And we had a completely different philosophy about how, it's like, in my mind, I'd like to ask some of these people, imagine having Christmas and all your kids' presents are under the tree, but none of them are wrapped. They're all out there, the BB gun, the toy, the doll, all the toys, all the presents are not wrapped. And they're out there 2 weeks before Christmas. So 2 weeks before Christmas, you know what you're going to get. There's no surprise. But if you got the present wrapped under the tree, a child might even be allowed to go up and pick it up and shake it and get an idea, try to guess what it is. But there's a lot of suspense there. And it's the same thing with what we were trying to do. All this stuff with the box and all that was just a wrapping. The present, what was real, the present was that 45-minute Broadway match, or
right.
45-minute match they had. And again, the proof of who's right, how was business doing? Les Thatcher and Ron Fuller were drawing those houses. Now, they were part of the process, but they weren't what was making it happen. Ron wasn't going to matches every night. Thatcher never went. Oh, he'd come to Knoxville, but he never traveled. So how did they know what was going on? I was the one, but not just me, but Ronnie and Malenko and Bobby. He would contribute if he could, if he had something to say. Bobby Orton Jr. Mm-hmm. We were the ones that were making it happen. We were the ones going up and down the road. Thatcher wasn't. We were the ones taking the risk in the arena. Thatcher and Fuller weren't. And Fuller never was. He was always a babyface. We were the ones taking the risk, doing the miles. Good, it was great territory. You didn't have to travel far, but you did have to travel every day. Sunday off, yeah, but the rest of the week you had to go out on the road. And those commensurate risks that you take, driving up to Hazard in Ireland, you're going through the mountains, all these switchbacks and curves and things.
Yeah, no street lights, no paved roads.
No.
I've been through there. I'm familiar with at least what it was back last time I was there, which was 30 plus years ago, but I can only imagine what it was another decade or so prior. So I totally get what you're saying. That's some risk you're taking, not just in the ring, but just making that travel through the mountains, because that is literally through the mountains. And you guys were doing it. It's risk and reward though, right? You guys were getting some decent paydays at that point in time, and you were selling out the houses and you were getting the response you wanted. And obviously the fans were enjoying themselves from video footage that does exist. The fans, the studio fans, not that there was a lot of them in the studio, but they were certainly eating everything you guys were doing up. So I thought it was pretty successful. Everybody has their own taste and opinions on what pro wrestling should be, especially today. But back then, I felt like there was room, and it made everything a little more entertaining. It added flavor to the pot for me. And as I go back and I read it and I see the video clips and things like that, I'm like, oh, this is kind of. I think that's what really made the Poffos, which we know how it wasn't successful financially, but I think that's what made it so interesting, right? Because you guys would invest all these weird angles and the crate and Pez Watley coming out in drag and tied up in the crate and all these other things that they did in the ICW with Angelo Poffos territory, but also prior to that with you guys in All Star and even back here, you booking in Knoxville. So there's a little Bob Roop, Ron Garvin type booking going through all of this. But again, everything goes back to Bob Roop when the stories are told that these angles were all Bob's idea. And you've stated from the beginning, not because you're putting blame on them, but because you're giving credit to Ron Garvin and the Great Malenko for helping you come up with a lot of the angles, the storylines, the feuds, etc.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of times they would come up with, say, 95% of it. And that was fine. It wasn't who was right. It was what's right. And the fact that I wouldn't, the other thing is we all liked each other. We respected each other. We were having a great time. Business was great. Like I say, the trips weren't bad. It was good life. Again, the bottom line was that if you're doing basically sellout business everywhere, while that was happening, it wasn't like, say, the first time we brought the box down to the ring, it wasn't like the next week dropped off like 30%. The next week, if it was down, it was down maybe, I don't know, maybe 2%. And then the week after that, same thing. We were drawing just about capacity everywhere, all the time, steadily. So how can you, that a promoter would try to temper that, would try to mess with that, just makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, again, if you have a big drop off, or you start getting letters, or people see Ron Fuller in public say, "Oh, that shit you guys are doing now is terrible," whatever, is one thing. But just because your ring announcer or your TV announcer doesn't like it, his opinion, and it's not a knock, it's a fact. His opinion about what is good business is limited compared to someone like Ronnie Garvin and Larry Simon, Boris Malenko, and even myself. I've been trained by Eddie Graham, one of the best Finnish guys of all time, in angles. And I'd seen all those angles with Funk and Briscoe and all that. Guys went out and worked hard. We had good matches. The underneath guys did what I asked them to do. They didn't wrestle outside the ring. The first, second, third match, guys went out on the floor smacking each other with chairs, like I see all the time now, which is just terrible booking. Because if you're going to have the main event do it, and they've already seen it 4 or 5 times before the main event, like in the first match, they've seen the same thing. Well, when the main event does it, it's not quite the same effect as if the main event is the one that does it first and only. So I look back on that, and I just wonder, I can't imagine where Ron Fuller's head was, because all you have to do is check what someone's telling you on the phone or in person, and look at your gate receipts. Oh, the gate receipts are, oh my God, they're stronger than they have been.
Well, we'll be getting into the gates. We'll be getting into how many fans you guys are putting in there. Somehow, some way, magically, most of that information has trickled out there. The results from that entire time period in '79 specifically, and a lot of the gates are maybe not the financials, but how many people were coming into the building during that period of your booking here in Knoxville. That a lot of that is out there. It was discussed on the other podcast, and it will be discussed here at length as well when we explain it from, I don't want to say another side, but just from the facts that I have here and some of the other people that have made some comments in regards to all of this. But, I didn't want to go too far off topic. I wasn't trying to get there yet, and I still don't plan to. So, okay. Spoiler alert for everyone out there. you can call that a teaser if you want, or we can just kind of discuss it because that goes in line with your booking. So that's why I didn't cut you off a while back when we first got into this whole Les Thatcher thing, but because this again plays into what's to come, but it also plays into the experiences you had while trying to book that territory. So you were trying to book that sports entertainment type thing that we would come to know a lot better in the 1980s, but you were doing it back here in the late 70s in Knoxville, and some people weren't necessarily the happiest about that. And that's unfortunate, but still a lot of great talent to work with. And as you said, the payday was the matches, and the matches certainly were there. They paid off, and we're going to get into more of that next time because I'm going to give everybody a spoiler alert right now. Next time out, guys, we're actually going to go back and we're going to talk about some more of the talent that was here during this time period. I want to talk a little bit more about Ron and Don Wright, but also journeyman, well, at least in the Knoxville area, the Tennessee, Kentucky area, Tony Peters. And I know you said you remembered him, so maybe we'll bring him up and just kind of talk about him being there in that time period, because he doesn't just work with you in Knoxville. You'll see him again in Angelo Poffo, All-Star and ICW and things like that. Bobby Orton's going to come in the fall here after you take over the book. Yeah, you actually dip back into Florida for a couple weeks at the end of the year, which is kind of odd. And then you're off to Japan. You're going to do a tour of Japan. Now, we'll save that for later on, but right now we're going to stick with Knoxville. Don't worry, guys. Crusher Blackwell, the Canadian Bumblebee, if you will, he's going to come to town. Ken Lucas, you said you had fond memories of Ken Lucas. So those are some of the names I want to discuss next time here on the show. But I appreciate you taking the time to discuss all of that booking and the ideas and things. And it really helped because I wouldn't have known to go there in regards to what you guys were trying to do. You guys had a mindset. It wasn't just booking wrestling. You had a mindset of what you wanted to present to kind of lead into the matches. And I love how you referred to it as kind of like the wrapping paper on the gift.
Right. Well, one last comment before we say goodbye. We had changed the basic philosophy. That territory, when I got there, Ron and Don Wright were still working, and you still had some of that the Deep South, that kind of stuff that, blood and guts, where everybody's bleeding, everybody's got brass knucks, just hardcore. You had that is part of the philosophy of the wrestling in that area of the South. We didn't have that. Ronnie and Malenko and I came up with stuff that maybe that was part of the problem. We changed it. I was booking off. I had worked in Florida. I started in Florida and worked there, and I was trained there. And I saw things like Briscoe and Valentine, Briscoe and Funk, both the Funks with anybody they worked with. Just some of the greatest workers that I had hundreds of, or let's say dozens and dozens of them I got to see and work with. So and Ronnie and Malenko both have all that ability too. We took the territory and we modernized completely. Forget all that blood and guts, that Don Fargo type mentality. Not to knock down, I love them. Not that mentality of like we're going to go and get hard ways. You could have taken our shows anywhere in the world, and they would have been acceptable and enjoyed, and as opposed to just being a kind of a local type like they still doing in the Deep South sometimes, shows they have. So, that was another thing that wasn't taken into consideration, and maybe it looked different to Fuller and Les Thatcher. So, well, what are these guys doing? Well, I think we were offering the finest product that the three of us come up with, which is pretty good. And if it looked different, the fans certainly said didn't seem to mind. So
change can be good, but it can also be worrisome when, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe I'm not trying to get into anybody's mind here, but that could have been thought process as well. Who was right? Who was wrong? I don't know. We'll continue to dig into that and really get deep with it, Bob, as we go on. And again, Next episode, going to try to make it lighthearted though, guys. Just going to go through some more of the talent here before we really get into it, because again, there's a lot to get into when we get there, and I don't want to attack it before I'm ready.
Well, as far as the lighthearted part, you folks out there listening, I don't have any hard feelings. I don't carry grudges. I wouldn't be alive if I did. They just make you sick. If you carry hate and anger and frustration and resentment, that's what your memories are made of. No wonder your mind doesn't work. You don't want to face your memories. Well, my mind works pretty well, and still. And I'm never upset when I'm talking about things. I might say something that sounds negative. I've been trying to explain behavior without offering my opinion on what the motive was. You out there as a listener, figure out what you think. But this is a labor of love on my part. I'm enjoying the heck out of being able to share my life and experiences with the world. And I want to thank you for doing it, Ray. Thank you, folks, for being with us again this week. Ray, I really appreciate it, my friend. You're the very best.
Well, thank you, Bob. All right, and that's going to do it. Closing up shop this week. Going to be back soon to continue on the story here of the Knoxville territory. Just a reminder out there, you guys can friend Bob over at facebook.com/PoorBobRoop. And you can find me, Ray Russell. Follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow me over at facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. Over 21,000 followers right now on Facebook and counting. But most of all, I encourage everybody to go over to patreon.com/WrestleCopia. That address again, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. So many great gifts there, including early show releases, digital downloads, video casts now available, and so much more. Check it out over at Patreon. Help support the brand. And until next time, on behalf of Bob, we ask you guys to hold tight and see where we head next time. Right here on the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop.